"Mock me again," the woman said with a cold smile as she let the crystal wine glass slip from her fingertips, the deep red liquid splashing across the white shirt of the quiet waiter standing before her. "Go ahead," she added, loud enough for every guest in the dining room to hear. "Show everyone what happens when a man like you forgets his place." Conversation stopped. Silverware rested against fine china. Even the pianist allowed the final note to fade into silence beneath the warm glow of the chandeliers. Ethan Brooks looked down at the stains spreading across his apron before lifting his calm blue eyes to meet hers. There was no anger in his face, no embarrassment either, only a quiet steadiness that somehow unsettled the room more than any outburst could have. Then he spoke, his voice low enough to invite people closer rather than push them away. "Mock me again," he said. "I dare you." A nervous laugh escaped from one of the executives seated near the window, but quickly disappeared. Something about the way Ethan stood, straight shoulders, relaxed hands, unwavering eyes, made it feel as though everyone had suddenly stepped into a story whose ending no one could predict. Victoria Sterling, billionaire founder and CEO of Sterling Global Holdings, had spent 20 years building an empire that stretched across America. Fortune magazines praised her discipline. Business schools studied her decisions. Employees feared disappointing her more than losing their jobs. She believed every person revealed their worth within the first minute of meeting them, and the quiet waiter standing before her had already been judged. To her, he was simply another invisible employee serving expensive dinners to people who mattered. But the restaurant itself seemed to disagree. The polished oak floors reflected soft amber light, like still water. The scent of rosemary butter and fresh sourdough drifted gently through the air. Somewhere near the open kitchen, a veteran dishwasher paused with a troubled expression, while an elderly hostess quietly folded her hands together, as though she had witnessed enough years to recognize the beginning of something important. Ethan reached for a clean linen towel, carefully wiped the edge of the table, and replaced Victoria's glass without a single hurried movement. "Your dinner will be ready in just a moment, ma'am," he said with genuine courtesy. His voice carried neither sarcasm nor surrender. It carried dignity. Victoria narrowed her eyes. She had expected excuses, apologies, perhaps even tears. Instead, she found herself staring at a man who refused to let humiliation define him. For reasons she could not explain, that unsettled her far more than defiance ever would. Around them, whispers spread quietly through the dining room like a passing breeze. No one knew that 48 hours earlier, Ethan Brooks had made a promise to his little daughter that he would never allow bitterness to become the inheritance she received from her father. And no one, not the guests, not the managers, not even Victoria Sterling herself, could have imagined that before this week was over, the woman who had tried to break his pride would be forced to question everything she believed about success, respect, and the true measure of a remarkable man. Ethan Brooks had not always measured his days by table numbers, dinner reservations, and the quiet clink of polished silverware. 48 hours before that unforgettable evening, his mornings began the same way they had for the past 7 years. At 6 o'clock, the alarm buzzed softly inside the modest 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of Portland. Before he poured himself a cup of coffee, before he checked the weather, before he even thought about work, he gently knocked on the bedroom door with faded white paint. "Rise and shine, Lily," he called with the same warm smile every morning. "You promised me pancakes on Tuesday." A sleepy giggle answered him before the door slowly opened. 9-year-old Lily Brooks appeared with messy blonde hair and bright blue eyes that looked remarkably like her father's. "Only if you do not burn them again," she teased. Ethan laughed quietly. "One little mistake 3 years ago, and I am never allowed to forget it." Their apartment was small but spotless. Family photographs filled the shelves instead of expensive decorations. One picture showed Ethan wearing a dark blue suit beside a beautiful woman with chestnut hair whose smile seemed to brighten the entire room. Another showed baby Lily asleep in her mother's arms. Every morning, Ethan paused for a second before those photographs. He never spoke out loud, but his eyes carried a silent promise that he would keep moving forward no matter how difficult life became. Breakfast was simple. Pancakes, fresh strawberries, and orange juice poured into mismatched glasses collected from years of garage sales and thrift stores. Lily happily packed her backpack while Ethan carefully braided her hair, a skill he had awkwardly learned after losing his wife to a sudden illness years before. He had watched countless tutorial videos until his daughter finally declared him almost as good as her mother. Those words had become one of the greatest compliments he had ever received. The drive to school took exactly 18 minutes. Their aging pickup truck rattled gently whenever it reached 40 miles per hour, but Ethan always joked that it had character instead of problems. Lily believed him because children often recognized hope long before adults did. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, she suddenly turned back toward him. "Daddy," she asked. "Yes, sweetheart. If someone is mean because they have more money, does that mean they win?" Ethan rested both hands on the steering wheel and smiled with quiet certainty. "No, sweetheart. Money can buy comfort, but it cannot buy character. The person who keeps kindness after being treated unfairly is always the strongest one in the room." Lily nodded thoughtfully before running toward the school entrance. Ethan watched until she disappeared through the doors, then whispered the words he repeated every single morning. "Your mother would be so proud of you." Only then did he start the truck and drive towards Sterling Grand Restaurant, unaware that before another 2 sunsets had passed, those very words about character would be tested in front of the most powerful woman he had ever met. By late afternoon, Sterling Grand Restaurant transformed into a stage where wealth spoke softly but expected to be heard. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished mahogany tables. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected the fading Oregon sunset, painting the dining room with shades of gold and amber. Every server adjusted each napkin until it rested perfectly. Every wine glass caught the light without a single fingerprint, and every employee understood that tonight's private dinner would host some of the most influential executives on the West Coast. Ethan Brooks arrived 30 minutes early, as he always did. He quietly straightened chairs, polished silverware one final time, and greeted every coworker with the same genuine smile that never seemed forced. "Good evening, Ethan," the elderly hostess, Margaret, said warmly. "I heard Sterling Global reserved the entire East dining room." Ethan nodded. "Then we should make sure they leave remembering great service instead of expensive furniture." Margaret smiled. "You always think that way." Ethan shrugged gently. "People remember how they are treated long after they forget what they ordered." Across the room, several younger servers whispered nervously. One of them leaned closer. "Have you ever served Victoria Sterling?" another asked. "Only once," came the anxious reply. She sent back sparkling water because the bubbles were not cold enough. A quiet laugh followed, though no one seemed truly amused. Restaurant manager Daniel Foster stepped into the dining room with quick, measured steps. His usually relaxed expression had disappeared beneath visible tension. "Everyone, listen carefully," he announced. "Miss Sterling expects absolute perfection tonight. No dilas, no mistakes, no surprises." His eyes paused on Ethan. "She specifically requested an experienced server after reading our staff profiles." Ethan answered with a respectful nod. "I understand." Daniel hesitated. "She chose you." Several employees exchanged sympathetic glances. One whispered, "I would trade sections with you if I could." Ethan simply smiled. "It is only dinner." But deep inside the room, an uneasy silence settled like an approaching storm. Exactly at 6:30, a line of black luxury vehicles rolled quietly beneath the covered entrance. Valets hurried forward as the restaurant doors opened. Victoria Sterling entered without rushing, dressed in an elegant navy business suit that reflected confidence rather than extravagance. Her posture was flawless. Her expression revealed nothing. Behind her walked board members, legal advisors, investors, and assistants carrying tablets instead of briefcases. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Conversations became quieter. Footsteps became lighter. Even the background music somehow felt softer. Ethan stepped forward with calm professionalism. "Good evening, Miss Sterling. Welcome to Sterling Grand. "It is my pleasure to serve your table tonight." Victoria glanced briefly at his name tag before looking away almost immediately. "I requested efficiency," she said evenly. "Not conversation." "Of course, ma'am," Ethan replied without hesitation. He gently guided the group toward the private dining room, never walking too quickly and never too slowly. Victoria noticed that unlike everyone else she encountered, he never appeared intimidated. He did not flatter her. He did not seek approval. He simply treated her with the same quiet respect he offered every guest. For reasons she could not yet explain, that simple truth irritated her far more than open defiance ever could, and somewhere behind her composed expression, the first spark of an unexpected collision had already begun to grow. The first course arrived with quiet precision. Fresh herbs released a gentle aroma as warm artisan bread rested inside linen baskets, and candlelight danced across crystal glasses that seemed almost too perfect to touch. Ethan Brooks served each guest with the same measured rhythm, remembering every preference without consulting a single note. One executive preferred sparkling water without lemon. Another requested butter softened to room temperature. A third quietly mentioned a food allergy only once, and Ethan never forgot it. Every detail was handled with calm confidence. Victoria Sterling noticed. She also noticed something else that bothered her even more. Ethan treated the newest intern with exactly the same respect he offered the billionaire sitting beside her. There was no trace of nervous admiration in his voice, no desperate attempt to impress anyone at the table. To Victoria, who had spent years surrounded by people eager to win her approval, his quiet consistency felt strangely unfamiliar. She finally set her menu down and studied him more carefully. "How long have you been serving tables?" she asked. Ethan answered honestly. "Almost 5 years, ma'am." "Only 5?" she replied with a faint smile. "You speak like someone who expected to do something much bigger with his life." Several executives looked down at their plates, sensing the conversation becoming personal. Ethan gently poured iced water into her glass before answering. "Life changes our plans sometimes. That does not mean the work in front of us becomes less meaningful." Victoria leaned back in her chair. "That sounds like something people tell themselves after settling for less." Silence settled across the table. Outside the windows, light rain began tapping softly against the glass, while the city lights shimmered through the evening mist like distant stars. Ethan remained completely composed. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "or perhaps success looks different after you lose something you cannot replace." His words carried no bitterness. They sounded like simple truth. Victoria searched his face for regret, resentment, or self-pity. She found none. That unsettled her more than any clever argument could have. Most people either defended themselves or tried to impress her. Ethan did neither. He simply accepted his own story without asking anyone else to approve of it. One of the board members cleared his throat, hoping to change the subject. "Miss Sterling, the Seattle acquisition should close by next month." She nodded automatically, but her attention remained fixed on the waiter standing beside the table. Something about him refused to fit inside the categories she had built over decades of judging people quickly. When Ethan stepped away to retrieve the next course, the youngest executive quietly whispered, "He seems unusually educated." Victoria answered without taking her eyes off the dining room. Appearances can be misleading. Yet even as she spoke those words, she wondered whether they applied more to Ethan than she had intended. Across the restaurant, Margaret watched Ethan carry another tray with the same steady hand she had seen every evening for years. She remembered the countless mornings he had arrived early after spending the night with his sick daughter, the afternoons he quietly helped new employees without seeking recognition, and the evenings he left only after making certain everyone else was ready for tomorrow. There were stories hidden beneath that simple white shirt, stories he never volunteered because he believed dignity did not need an audience. Victoria had not discovered those stories yet, but for the first time in many years, she found herself wanting to know why a man with so little seemed to possess a peace that money had never been able to purchase. The evening continued with effortless elegance until a subtle change rippled through the private dining room. A senior investment partner from Chicago glanced at his phone, and the color quietly drained from his face. He leaned toward another executive, whispering just loudly enough for concern to spread around the table. Within seconds, conversations faded into uneasy silence. Victoria Sterling immediately noticed the shift. "What happened?" she asked. The executive swallowed carefully before answering. The video conference with the Japanese partners was moved forward by 30 minutes. They're already waiting online, and they're threatening to postpone the acquisition if we are not ready. Another board member checked his tablet and frowned. The presentation files are not loading through the restaurant network. Our technology team is still downtown because of the traffic. Victoria's expression remained composed, but the slight tightening around her eyes revealed pressure that few people ever witnessed. Months of negotiations and billions of dollars depended upon a meeting that was beginning to unravel because of a simple technical failure. The room suddenly felt smaller. Crystal glasses remained untouched. Half-finished dinners cooled quietly beneath the warm lights. Every passing second carried a growing sense of urgency. Ethan approached the table with fresh coffee, immediately sensing that something far more important than dinner had interrupted the evening. He did not interrupt the discussion. Instead, he quietly placed each cup before the guests with the same steady hands as before. As he turned to leave, he heard one frustrated executive sigh. "Without secure access to the backup files, we cannot continue. Everything is stored on the encrypted server." Ethan paused politely. "Excuse me, Miss Sterling." Victoria looked up, surprised that he had spoken during a business discussion. "Yes. I apologize for overhearing," Ethan said respectfully. "Would it be helpful if your presentation could be displayed through a direct wire connection instead of the wireless network?" One executive looked almost amused. "This is corporate encryption, not a television at home." Ethan simply nodded. "Of course, sir." He started to walk away before Victoria unexpectedly stopped him. "Why would you ask that question?" Ethan answered without hesitation. "Because this building still has a dedicated fiber connection in the executive conference room downstairs. It is rarely used now, but remains isolated from the guest network. If your files are accessible through a secure cable connection, it may provide a stable alternative." The executives exchanged puzzled glances. Manager Daniel Foster blinked in surprise. "How do you even know that?" Ethan smiled gently. "Several years ago, the restaurant renovated its conference facilities. I helped move the equipment after hours. I remembered seeing the network cabinet." Victoria studied him carefully. "You understand secure network infrastructure?" Ethan shrugged modestly. "Only enough to remember where things are." There was no arrogance in his voice, only quiet confidence. For the first time that evening, Victoria hesitated before responding. Every instinct told her that a waiter should not know the answer to a problem her technology advisors had failed to solve. Yet every passing minute increased the risk of losing an agreement that could shape her company's future. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the windows while distant thunder rolled softly above the city. Inside, an unexpected silence settled over the table. Victoria looked directly into Ethan's calm blue eyes, searching for uncertainty and finding none. At last, she spoke with measured restraint. "Show us the conference room." No one at the table realized that this simple request would become the first crack in the wall of assumptions Victoria Sterling had spent a lifetime building around herself. Victoria Sterling led the group downstairs with quick, confident steps, though inside she felt something she rarely experienced: uncertainty. The executive conference room had not been used in months. Dust rested lightly on the polished walnut table, and the large display screen remained dark beneath the soft glow of recessed ceiling lights. Outside, the rain continued to fall against the basement windows, creating a quiet rhythm that seemed strangely calm compared to the tension filling the room. One executive sighed heavily. "We are wasting valuable time." Another glanced impatiently at his watch. The investors have been waiting for nearly 15 minutes. Ethan Brooks walked toward a small storage cabinet in the corner without rushing. He opened the door, reached behind several neatly stacked boxes, and pulled out a coiled fiber cables still sealed inside its original packaging. Daniel Foster stared in disbelief. I forgot those were even here. Ethan smiled politely. Sometimes the things we need are simply waiting where everyone stopped looking. He connected the cable with careful hands, checked the network panel, and pressed a single switch hidden behind the equipment rack. Tiny green indicator lights flickered to life, one after another. The room remained silent. One information technology advisor opened his laptop again almost reluctantly. His fingers moved across the keyboard for several seconds before his eyes suddenly widened. The secure server is responding. Another executive leaned closer. Can you access the presentation? A brief pause followed. Then a smile slowly appeared across the man's face. Every file is here. Relief swept through the room like fresh air after a storm. Laptops opened. Documents synchronized. Charts appeared on the large display screen, exactly as they had been prepared days earlier. Victoria stood quietly near the doorway, watching Ethan step backward as though none of it deserved recognition. He had not asked for praise. He had not reminded anyone that his suggestion had solved the problem. Instead, he simply straightened one of the conference chairs that had become slightly crooked and prepared to leave. "Mr. Brooks," Victoria called. Ethan turned respectfully. "Yes, ma'am. How did you know that would work?" He considered the question for a moment before answering. "I do not know. I believe it was worth trying." One board member laughed softly with genuine admiration. "That answer sounds remarkably different from guessing." Ethan offered a humble smile. "Experience teaches us to notice small details. Sometimes they become important later." Victoria looked at him more carefully than ever before. There was no performance in his words, no desire to impress powerful people, only the quiet confidence of someone who had learned to solve problems without needing applause. Her phone vibrated gently. The Japanese investors had rejoined the meeting and were ready to continue. She nodded toward the screen. "Thank you." The words were brief, almost unfamiliar on her lips. Ethan inclined his head. "You're welcome, ma'am. I hope the rest of your evening goes well." He quietly closed the conference room door behind him, leaving nothing except calm silence in his wake. For several long seconds, no one spoke. One senior advisor finally broke the silence. "That waiter knows far more than he should." Victoria remained still, her eyes fixed on the closed door. She had spent years believing that talent always announced itself through titles, expensive offices, and impressive resumes. Yet the man who had quietly rescued one of the most important business meetings of her career wore a simple white service shirt and an apron. For the first time in many years, Victoria Sterling found herself asking a question she could not immediately answer. Who was Ethan Brooks before the world stopped paying attention to him? The conference ended nearly 40 minutes later with quiet smiles replacing anxious expressions. One by one, the executives closed their laptops, their relief impossible to hide. The acquisition would move forward exactly as planned. Several board members congratulated Victoria Sterling, believing her leadership had once again carried the company through another difficult moment. Victoria accepted their compliments with polite grace, yet her thoughts remained somewhere else entirely. They remained fixed on the quiet waiter who had slipped back upstairs without waiting to hear whether his suggestion had succeeded. As the guests returned to the private dining room for dessert, Victoria noticed Ethan moving calmly between tables, refilling coffee cups and clearing empty plates as though nothing unusual had happened. There was no hint that he had quietly prevented a multi-million-dollar disaster. No one else in the restaurant would have guessed it from watching him. That bothered her in a way she could not explain. Most people spent their lives searching for recognition. Ethan seemed almost determined to avoid it. While the guests enjoyed coffee, Victoria excused herself for a brief moment and stepped toward the manager's office. Daniel Foster looked surprised to see her standing at his door. "Miss Sterling, is everything satisfactory?" She closed the door gently behind her. "I have a question about one of your employees." Daniel smiled cautiously. "Ethan, yes." She folded her arms. "Who exactly is he?" Daniel hesitated, unsure how much he should say. "He is the most dependable person I have ever managed." "Victoria Watif." "That is not what I asked." Daniel slowly nodded. Several years ago, before he came here, Ethan worked for a technology consulting company. From what I understand, he was doing exceptionally well. Victoria Froneth. Then why is he serving tables? Daniel looked toward the framed employee schedule hanging on the wall before answering quietly. His wife became seriously ill. He left his career because the travel kept him away from home. After she passed away, he chose work with flexible hours so he could raise his daughter himself. The room fell silent. Daniel continued softly. He has been offered management positions more than once. He always declines because they would take time away from Lily. Victoria stared at him without speaking. He never talks about it, Daniel added. Most of our newer employees do not even know his story. He believes people should be judged by how they treat others today, not by what they used to be. Victoria thanked him almost automatically before stepping back into the hallway. The restaurant suddenly looked different. The polished floors, the glowing lights, the gentle music drifting through the dining room all seemed unchanged, yet the man carrying a tray near the window no longer appeared ordinary. She watched Ethan pause beside an elderly couple celebrating an anniversary. He quietly noticed the woman struggling to read the menu in the dim light, and, without drawing attention to her difficulty, moved a candle a few inches closer before wishing them a wonderful evening. Neither guest realized what he had done. Ethan simply smiled and walked away. Victoria felt something unfamiliar settle inside her chest. It was not guilt alone. It was respect slowly replacing judgment. For years, she had believed greatness announced itself through wealth, influence, and achievement. Yet the finest example of character she had encountered in months was wearing a simple apron and carrying empty coffee cups with the same quiet dignity he had carried every burden life had placed upon his shoulders. And for the first time that evening, Victoria Sterling realized the man she had underestimated had never once tried to prove her wrong. He had simply continued being exactly who he was. When the final dessert plates were served, the atmosphere inside the private dining room had softened. The pressure of the business meeting had disappeared, replaced by quiet conversations and the gentle sound of coffee being poured into porcelain cups. Ethan Brooks moved through the room with the same calm rhythm that had defined his entire evening. Nothing about his expression suggested he expected gratitude. He simply continued doing his job. As he reached Victoria Sterling's table to refill her cup, one of the visiting executives laughed lightly. "You should hire him for the technology department, instead of leaving him here." Another executive smiled. "Someone with his knowledge is wasted carrying trays." A few guests nodded in agreement. Before Ethan could respond, another investor leaned back in his chair and said with a careless grin, "Although I suppose some people are simply more comfortable staying small." The words were not shouted. They were spoken almost casually, yet they settled across the room with surprising weight. Several employees lowered their eyes. Daniel Foster froze near the entrance. Margaret quietly stopped arranging menus. Ethan placed the coffee pot gently onto the service card. He neither frowned nor defended himself. "Every honest job deserves respect, sir," he answered with quiet sincerity. "I have never believed that serving others makes a person small." The investor gave a dismissive shrug. Easy thing to say when you never made it to the top. Before anyone else could react, Victoria slowly placed her coffee cup onto its saucer. The delicate sound echoed through the silent room. She stood. Every conversation immediately stopped. Those who knew her expected another sharp remark, another effortless display of authority. Instead, she looked directly at the investor. "You are mistaken," she said calmly. "The smallest person in this room is never the one wearing the apron. It is the one measuring another human being by a job title." The executive blinked in surprise. Victoria continued before anyone could interrupt. "Tonight, this man quietly protected a business agreement worth more than many companies will ever earn. He solved a problem none of us recognized in time. He asked for nothing in return. He did not interrupt our meeting to claim credit. He simply went back to serving dinner because he believed that was the right thing to do." Silence filled the dining room. Even the soft music from the grand piano seemed distant. Victoria turned toward Ethan. Her voice remained steady, but it carried something entirely new. Humility. Mr. Brooks, earlier this evening, I judged you before I knew anything about you. I confused position with character. I was wrong. No one could remember the last time Victoria Sterling had apologized in public. Ethan looked at her with the same calm expression he had worn all evening. "Thank you, ma'am," he said gently. "It takes courage to say those words." She gave a faint smile that reached her eyes for the first time that night. "No," she answered softly. "It takes courage to live the way you do." Around the room, no one applauded. No one spoke. They simply watched two people standing on opposite sides of life, discovering that genuine respect could erase a distance wealth had never been able to bridge. And in that quiet moment, the silence Ethan had carried with dignity all evening became far more powerful than every careless word that had been spoken against him. 1 year later, the first warm Saturday of spring settled gently over Portland. Sunlight poured through the broad windows of Sterling Grand Restaurant, now filled with families, neighbors, and familiar faces who came as much for the welcoming atmosphere as they did for the food. Fresh flowers rested on every table. Soft piano music drifted through the dining room, and the scent of baked bread carried the comforting promise that ordinary moments often became life's most meaningful memories. Ethan Brooks adjusted a row of neatly folded menus before smiling as the front door opened. A little girl hurried inside with a bright blue backpack bouncing against her shoulders. "Daddy," Lily called happily. Ethan knelt to greet her with a warm embrace. "How was school?" "I got 100% on my science project," she said proudly. "I knew you would," he answered. "Your hard work always shows." Before either of them noticed, another familiar voice spoke from nearby. "Congratulations, Lily." Both turned together. Victoria Sterling stood near the entrance wearing simple jeans, a light sweater, and no business entourage. There were no assistants carrying tablets, no waiting drivers, and no executives following behind her. For the first time since Ethan had met her, she looked like someone enjoying a peaceful afternoon rather than preparing for another board meeting. Lily smiled politely. "Thank you, Miss Victoria." Victoria reached into a small gift bag and handed Lily a children's astronomy book. "I heard someone loves science." Lily looked toward her father before accepting it. Ethan nodded gently. "What do we say?" "Thank you very much," Lily replied with genuine excitement. As the little girl walked toward her favorite booth to begin reading, Victoria remained quietly beside Ethan. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable now, no longer filled with misunderstanding, but with quiet respect earned over time. "I've been coming here every Saturday for 3 months," Victoria admitted with a soft smile. "At first I told myself it was because the coffee is excellent." Ethan laughed quietly. "And now?" She looked around the restaurant. Elderly couples laughed together. Young parents helped children color paper placemats. Employees greeted every guest by name. "Now I think it is because this place reminds me of something I spent years chasing without realizing it." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "What is that?" Victoria answered without hesitation. "Peace." She looked at him with sincere gratitude. "You changed more than one evening for me. You changed the way I measure success." Ethan folded a clean linen towel and placed it carefully on the service counter. Sometimes life teaches us through unexpected people. Victoria Nadif. And sometimes the greatest leaders never sit behind executive desks. Their eyes met, not with romance born from fantasy, but with the quiet understanding that grows only after pride gives way to respect. Outside, children laughed as spring flowers swayed gently beneath a clear blue sky. Inside, Lily looked up from her new book and smiled at the two adults talking near the window. It was a simple picture, almost ordinary, yet it carried the kind of hope money could never purchase. Ethan had never won by proving anyone wrong. He had won by refusing to let another person's judgment change the goodness within his own heart. And in the end, the greatest miracle was not that a billionaire learned to admire a waiter. It was that both of them discovered true wealth had never been measured by power, titles, or possessions, but by the quiet dignity to treat every person with grace every single day.